Jason, and feel free to jump in here anytime, Judah, as well. What's your take on the US economy at the moment? We've had people predicting that by now we'd be in the midst of recession, but seems consumer spending is still reasonably strong. The Fed's still trying to curb inflation with more rate hikes end of March. Where's this big slowdown gone? It seems to have evaporated. And what are people buying if they're not buying imported products from Asia, like Judah's just suggested?
Yeah, so no, it's funny as Judah was talking, I was sitting here literally looking up what are the, water and air, what are the commodities that we've seen decline the most? And I think it sort of says it all. It's like you look in air freight, volumes from Asia, what's down the most from where we were? Computers, sweaters, phones, microphones and loudspeakers, more clothing, and printer ink, as an example. So it's folks drawing down on tech purchases, it's less clothing demand. On the water side, one word, furniture. Anything single family housing related, right, has been very much hit by this huge cool down of housing activity of roughly 30% from this time last year. So, I mean, the US economy in general, we are in a freight recession for the trucking sector. We have been since the third quarter. Volumes are down a couple percent from where they were a year ago at this time. That may not seem like much, but when you've also added 3 to 4% of more capacity and you have volumes drop 2%, you have this recipe for this sharp decline in spot truckload prices, very akin to what Judah was talking about on the ocean side. But overall, the economy is not showing what I call the true red flag indicators that a recession is imminent. Credit card delinquency rates are actually still below pre-COVID levels, albeit rising. Mortgage delinquency rates are actually falling still and are actually at the lowest levels since before the global financial crisis. Wage growth is still very robust. If you strip out the shelter component from inflation, inflation's actually right where the Fed would want it. It's just we've got this lagging shelter piece. And right now, in terms of what's doing well in the US economy, motor vehicles and parts are doing very well. Construction equipment, farm equipment, heavy machinery is doing well. And everything associated with infrastructure, concrete, cement, and things of that sort are doing very well. So in some ways, it's almost the opposite freight recession that we had in 2019, where that was very much an industrial pullback, but the consumer piece and the import piece stayed fairly strong. We did have some decline from Asia because everybody brought things in before the 2019 tariffs, but we're almost in an opposite situation. So right now, barring some major shock, it does not look like the US economy is going into a recession, at least for a couple more quarters, if not, may again have that soft landing we all want.
So we've got a freight recession instead then.
Yeah, but we've had freight recessions without actual recessions, 2015, 2016, 2019, now 22, 23. And freight is, from a macroeconomic picture, a relatively small piece of GDP. That's why we can experience a recession, but the economy in general doesn't have one.
I would jump in and just add a couple of things to what Jason was saying, which I think is great. A couple factors when we talk about a freight recession, it doesn't necessarily align with what you're seeing in consumer spending. If we think about how significant a pull forward was in the first half of last year. So because importers were trying to bring in as much inventory as possible because sales were so strong and because delays and disruptions were so significant that a lot of retailers were just trying to bring in as much inventory as they could when they could, because they had been stuck with shortages of inventory earlier in the pandemic when congestion and delays became so significant. So really in the first half of last year was the pull forward of peak season. Now that peak season overshot consumer demand because consumer demand started shifting around May of last year. So part of what we're seeing now in terms of the freight recession is that inventories were in surplus for a long time. And just last week, I think we're being this week, there were earnings called by Nike saying that they're still struggling with excess inventory. And if all those goods are already stateside, then that results in lower demand for freight and lower freight rates and everything else. It doesn't necessarily mean that consumers aren't buying and kind of running through that supply. So that's kind of another factor unique to freight. The other thing I wanted to say, which I think reflects what Jason was saying, was that if you look at the transatlantic rates there, are still about double, more than double what they were in 2019. They've come down by about 50% from their peak earlier in the year, which was about $8,000 per container. but this is a different type of goods mix, right? So when we talk about Trans-Pacific, it's really consumer goods. And as Jason said, the mix of what people are buying, because buying patterns changed so much when people were stuck at home during the pandemic, less bulky items and things like that is having that big effect on the Trans-Pacific. On the transatlantic, it's a different mix of goods, and actually demand is higher. It's still higher than it was in 2019, even though it's been declining since about, I think about October of last year or something like that. So, right. So that's another indication that, it's possible for the economy to be strong and to see Trans-Pacific demand go way down just because of all these different factors that you have to take into account.